against Cuba, and the president intended to live up to his word. Khrushchev had removed the warheads, and we were going to, at least on the face of it, stop our secret war. But the CIA did not want to listen to the president. They wouldn't honor his agreement, and they kept training the invasion troops on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain in New Orleans and No Name Key in Florida and in Guatemala. The president found out about it, was incredibly angered, sent in the FBI and the Miami police, broke up the training camps, confiscated the weapons, made arrests, destroyed ammunition. And at this time, the president's enemies, all of his enemies, the anti-Castro Cuban community that felt betrayed after the Bay of Pigs, that element within the Central Intelligence Agency that felt the president was too soft on communism, organized crime that wanted Cuba back because they wanted the casinos opened again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were losing millions of dollars a day in income because Castro had closed the casinos until he was out of the way. There was no way of getting them opened again. And, of course, the ultra-right wing for political reasons. So all of the president's enemies were angered at him over Cuba. So between Cuba and Vietnam, we feel that is the strongest motivation for getting the president killed.
Let me switch gears here and bring up the Roscoe White incident. As you know, in recent months, the son of Roscoe White, who at the time was a Dallas policeman at the time of the assassination, I'll try to provide the background here so I can lead up to a question to you. Roscoe White was a Dallas policeman at the time of the assassination. Since that time, his son has claimed that he has uncovered diaries and various cryptic references to the possibility that Roscoe White was recruited by the CIA to join the Dallas Police Department for some sort of national security purpose. It has been since said that Roscoe White may have been involved, perhaps even unwittingly, in the assassination itself, may have been present when James Tippit, the officer, was killed shortly after the president was murdered, that Roscoe White may have been a CIA plant within the Dallas police. In addition, I'm well aware that Roscoe White's widow had a photograph which he produced later, well after the assassination, one of the Lee Harvey Oswald backyard photographs, which Oswald always felt were forged, and which were highly incriminating in the case against him. Many people remember the Life magazine cover with Lee Harvey Oswald standing in his backyard, leftist literature in one arm, his Mannlicher Carcano rifle in the other. I'm wondering if, since you've been in Dallas, if you've been able to follow the developments with the Roscoe White and his son situation, and whether or not you can shed some new light on what the photographic evidence was and all of that as pertains to Roscoe White.
Well, Roscoe's son, Ricky, came forward last October in a press conference held last August, here in Dallas, and released to the press the story of what he had found, which was evidence in a diary and some cables that were found and other bits of evidence indicating that his father was one of the assassins of President Kennedy. Researchers have been looking into this for quite some period of time now, and many of the peripheral bits of evidence around it seem to have crumbled a bit. Some of the finer points that do not directly relate to the issue itself do not seem to hold water. But the central story itself, no one has been able to tear that apart yet. Every bit of that still remains intact. So at this stage of the game, hopefully with a pending investigation, an official investigation by the Texas State Attorney General's office, we are being cautious. We're saying, yes, there seems to be something to it, but we should not rush to judgment in either respect. We shouldn't discount it out of hand just because there are some things that are not particularly important that do not seem to bear up. The central story itself, no one has been able to disprove, and we do feel that a formal investigation is necessary to look into this, to investigate a great many of the allegations that were made at the time, but a great many more that the public is not aware of that have come forward since then. There have been a lot of people who have come forward to corroborate the story, but again, their stories need to be borne out as well.
Mm-hmm. And what about the photographs? It was Roscoe White's widow who produced what I believe was the fourth photo of Lee Harvey Oswald in the backyard, or am I mistaken there?
Well, in a way, you're correct. In fact, it's the third one that we've seen, but the fourth one to be spoken about in evidence. On the afternoon of the assassination, actually the evening, two photographs allegedly, were found in the garage in Irving, Texas, where Oswald's family was living at the house of Ruth Michael Payne. One of those photographs was enlarged by the Dallas police and was shown to Lee Harvey Oswald that evening. Oswald took one look at it and said, "That's my face, not my body. That picture's a fake." So I can show you how that was done. I used to do that myself. Mm-hmm. The photograph shows Lee Harvey Oswald, and almost everybody has seen it. It's a black and white photograph that shows him holding the rifle that was alleged to be used to kill President Kennedy, and on his right hip he's wearing a pistol alleged to be the one used to kill Officer Tippit. And for good measure, in his right hand, he's holding a copy of the Daily Worker and the Militant, two socialist newspapers. This easily convicted Oswald in the public's mind as being the assassin of President Kennedy. The problem is that these photographs are universally considered to be faked by photographic experts around the world.
Including yourself, I take it?
Oh, absolutely, including myself.
Mm-hmm. These are the work of intelligence agents, fake photographs, are they not?
Well, as good as they are, as well done as they are, I would say definitely yes. Mm-hmm. And the speed at which they were found after the assassination shows that they had to have been prepared prior to the assassination.
Highly suspicious.
It takes the issue of the conspiracy. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Oswald was shown one of them. Marina Oswald, his wife, was asked if she took the photographs, and originally she said no, she did not. Then eventually, under coercion, she said yes, that she had taken the photograph. And then they showed her two. Then she said she had taken the two. A third photograph was discovered by Oswald's mother and was destroyed, was ripped up and thrown away. She described it eventually as having Oswald showing a rifle held in both hands over his head, which is different than the other two. Now, the final one, the one that was produced by Geneva White, was the one that was originally shown in the Senate Intelligence Committee hearings report, and then eventually in the House Assassinations Committee report. And it is a third photograph that has never appeared anywhere else. The only original photograph ever to surface was in possession of Roscoe White.
Okay.
So he is connected to this in some way. We just don't know
how
far and which direction.
Mr. Groden, I owe for another break. Please hold. We're pleased to have Robert Groden, author of High Treason, on for this hour. He is in Dallas right now, where he's technical advisor to Oliver Stone's movie JFK. We owe for a break here, and the news headlines will be right back. It's Chuck Meyer for Rick and Suds on News Talk. It's 3:34 in the afternoon. Our guest this hour is Robert Groden. He is technical advisor on the new Oliver Stone film JFK. He's also the author of High Treason, a top-selling book on the JFK assassination. We appreciate his presence here because he's awful busy in Dallas these days. Mr. Groden, let me go back and talk a little bit more about planted evidence in this case. One of the things I guess makes a lot of people very suspicious that U.S. intelligence played some kind of a direct role in the killing of the president that day was that the U.S. intelligence agencies were very quick to produce evidence almost immediately after the assassination, in some cases even beforehand, pointing to Lee Harvey Oswald. Does that in itself make it very suspicious?
Certainly. Lee Harvey Oswald seems to have had connections himself with intelligence agencies from the late 1950s anyway. I mean, he joins the Marine Corps, where he's taught to speak fluent Russian. Now, that's not exactly an everyday event. He has a very spectacular Marine Corps career in that he has a higher security clearance than his own commanding officer, has a fight with an NCO. He's never charged with anything. He ends up shooting himself with a Derringer when he's in the Marines. Just a tremendous amount of oddball stuff happening. He's sent to the Tsugi Air Base, where he gets access to the U-2 spy flights, comes back to the United States, applies for an early hardship discharge, gets it, goes to the Soviet Union, defects, goes to the U.S. Embassy there, tells them that he's going to give away the U.S. military secrets, does so, and then when he's tired of living over there, comes on back here. Not only do we welcome him back with open arms, we lend him the money to do it. And then he's never debriefed. He's never arrested as a traitor. He's never tried for giving away the secrets.
Yeah. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it or not, but Philip Melanson's book, Spy Saga, points out that Lee Harvey Oswald was almost unquestionably a U.S. intelligence agent at various times in his life, maybe on November 22nd, 1963. But the point that Melanson makes, and maybe you can elaborate on this, is that there may not have ever been in the history of the United States a 24-year-old man with a paper trail in U.S. intelligence as thick as Lee Harvey Oswald's.
This is true, and ironically enough, when the House Assassinations Committee was having their sessions, they brought before them Richard Helms, the ex-director of the Central Intelligence Agency. They asked Helms about Lee Harvey Oswald's 201 file, which is a personnel file. Now, one would ask, why in heaven's name would they have a personnel file on Lee Harvey Oswald? Well, they asked Richard Helms that question. He said, well, it wasn't a genuine file. It was only a dummy file, so it didn't matter. Well, the obvious question is, why have a dummy personnel file on Lee Harvey Oswald, of all people? But the question was never asked.
Mm-hmm.
They just went on to other bits of information, and they let it stand. It is the most illogical thing to allow them to get away with that kind of an answer.
Mm-hmm.
A dummy file?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because...
For what purpose?
Well, yeah, because there was an intelligence purpose, at least presumably.
Exactly. And Lee Harvey Oswald's file wasn't always empty. We can be pretty sure of that.
Why, or maybe you know more about this than the general public, but why haven't the details of the extensive questioning that Lee Harvey Oswald went under after his arrest? He was interrogated for at least 6 hours right after his arrest, and then into the night, into Saturday. Very few details have ever been released of what he told the police while in custody, and obviously he was interviewed by different cops at different times. Why don't we know much about what he said?
Well, we're told that the office was too small to bring in a tape recorder to record it, and the questions were becoming too hot and heavy to allow them to be taken down as notes. Well, it's not exactly true. We do know that the room was an interrogation room. It was wired. There was a tape recorder involved. The tapes have never been made public and are formally denied to exist. We have been trying now for quite a few years to obtain them. We do know where they are, and we are hoping that somewhere along the line we'll be able to obtain them. But as it stands now, we just have to wait and hope.
Mm-hmm. A couple of real strange occurrences before the assassination that most critics like yourself point to as being keys to the setup of the plot. Summertime in New Orleans, 1963, where Lee Harvey Oswald and a number of nefarious characters kind of meet in a vortex. And September 1963 in Mexico City, where the CIA reportedly observes Lee Harvey Oswald going into Soviet and Cuban embassies trying to make some kind of a deal. I'd like you to elaborate on those in just a minute, but I do have to break again, if you don't mind holding. Robert Groden is our guest, author of High Treason, 3:39 at WIOD. We'll be back in the minutes ahead. Suds. My guest this hour is Robert Groden, author of High Treason, technical advisor to the Oliver Stone film JFK. Matter of fact, in the movie, Kevin Costner will play Jim Garrison, the New Orleans district attorney, whose interpretation of this crime, Robert, I'm sure doesn't differ a whole lot from yours. And, of course, when he had his own investigation in the late 1960s, he felt that the plot to kill the president had been hatched in New Orleans, and he knew who did it. Why don't you try to interpret for us how you think that the events in the summer of 1963 involving Oswald, David Ferry, Clay Shaw, perhaps, and others played a role in what happened in Dallas a few months later?
Well, Oswald left Dallas and went to New Orleans for a while and went to work for the Riley Coffee Company and became very, very visual, very obvious in what he was doing. He joined the Fair Play for Cuba committee there, of which he was the sole member. There wasn't another member of the Fair Play for Cuba committee in New Orleans. He had printed up, allegedly, leaflets to hand out, membership cards, things of that nature, which he did not have the income to pay for, yet they were paid for. Also, he hired 3 other people to help him hand this literature out on Canal Street and in front of the Trade Mart and other places. He didn't have the money to pay them either, yet they got paid. Oswald seems to have been being set up as somebody with a very, very strong pro-Castro involvement And people ask me virtually every day, if they wanted to kill the president, why didn't they just poison him or do something very, very quiet, just get it out of the way? Why in the public's eye? And the issue seems to go back to what we were talking about before, and it all centers around what happened in New Orleans. And that is, they set Oswald up as a pro-Castroite, killed the president, blamed it on Oswald, and by connection made it look as if he was acting for Fidel Castro, so that the people who wanted Castro removed now have their primary opposition removed, and in such a way where the avenue is open to get revenge against Castro, to get an official response from the U.S. government to go after Castro.
They set him up as a left-winger, a Cuba sympathizer, when in fact, I guess behind the scenes, he was doing lots of business with the other side. That is to say, anti-Castro guerrillas, right-wingers, people like, Guy Bannister, whose office was right around the corner from Lee Harvey Oswald's office.
Well, the address was around the corner, but it was both the same building.
Exactly, same building, just down the hallway, literally. And then there's David Ferrie, and I've never been able to figure out David Ferrie, and for those who have studied the assassination, they know that he's this bizarre character with his own Miami connections, of course, but who in the fall of 1963 was up to some strange comings and goings, including his relationship with Carlos Marcello. What do you make of David Ferrie? Was he part of this?
I personally think he was. I think that Jim Garrison made a very, very strong case for that. The thing is that when Garrison was going to arrest him, Ferrie, of course, died mysteriously. There were 2 typed, unsigned suicide notes in his apartment and empty pill containers all over the place, yet the coroner ruled natural causes. It just doesn't ring true. The problem with Ferrie is that he was so incredibly bizarre and so weird and led such a weird, disorganized life that it's very difficult to try to place anything within perspective as it relates to him. One thing we do know is he was the head of the Civil Air Patrol unit that Lee Harvey Oswald had been a member of as a young man.
Mm-hmm. How about September 1963 in Mexico City, which some feel is a key or the key to the assassination? Again, in a nutshell, it seems where the CIA is well in advance of the assassination, setting up Oswald again as a sympathizer and one who would have motive, means, and opportunity to kill the president later.
Well, that's quite transparent in that respect. The CIA was photographing the comings and goings within the Cuban and Soviet embassies in Mexico City, photographing everyone who went in or came out. And they photographed out of both embassies over a period of a few days a man who they identified as Lee Henry Oswald. And this Lee Oswald is certainly not our Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald was slim, slightly thinning on top with straight black hair. In fact, the man who is photographed coming out of the embassies in each case is a very stocky character, weighing, I'd say easily 60 or 70 pounds more than Oswald. Has a very thick, muscular neck and a crew cut.
Well, as a matter of fact, in your book, I believe you have named that man. Is that correct?
Well,
he looks a lot like a guy who was in Dealey Plaza.
He looks like a fellow named Jim Hicks. I think that's just a similarity that's being pointed out. We don't really believe that it was Jim Hicks. Jim Hicks actually was shorter than this fellow appears to be.
All right.
But they do look a lot alike. The point is that he does not look anything like Lee Harvey Oswald. No one was ever supposed to actually see those pictures. The purpose of all this means to just strengthen the legend that Lee Harvey Oswald was a pro-Castroite trying to obtain a visa to go to Cuba. At the time that Oswald was there, however, or alleged to be there, he was also seen in Oklahoma. So we have a massive problem with finding one man in at least 2 places at the same time.
Mm-hmm. The whole business about Oswald being set up, do you conclude, now you said at the very beginning of the hour that you don't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald shot the president or by himself. Do you think he was in on it that day? Do you think he knew what was going on, or was he placed there and perhaps knew immediately as shots rang out that he was in big trouble?
Lee Harvey Oswald may have had prior knowledge of the assassination. It is possible from one side or the other. He may have stumbled across the conspiracy. Somebody may have tried to drag him into it. The reason, by the way, that we feel Oswald never fired a shot is based on several pieces of evidence. Number one, the Dallas Police Department, the afternoon of the assassination, gave Oswald a paraffin test. They tested for gunpowder. There was no gunpowder on his hands. There was no gunpowder on his cheeks. There was some nitrates on his hand, which shows that he did not wash his hands to get rid of the gunpowder. But there was no nitrates on his cheeks. So he did not fire a rifle that day and probably had not fired any weapon for at least 24 hours prior to the shooting. The 24 hours is the amount of time that they would normally give for the activation of the paraffin test. He probably had not fired a weapon for considerably some time prior to the assassination.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. Number two, he had no known motive. Number three, from the time of the assassination, there were two people walking down the stairs. Oswald would have to have passed both of these ladies, one of whom was Victoria Adams, and they both testified that nobody passed them, including Oswald.
And I would imagine that similarly you feel that he had nothing to do with the killing of J.D. Tippit a little while later in a different part of the city.
Absolutely. The shooting of Officer Tippit may have had no connection to the Kennedy assassination whatsoever. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But the point of the matter is that Oswald didn't shoot him either. Oswald was given he was given the chance to talk to the press a few moments here and there during the brief moments of life he had left after the assassination. Of course, he was murdered the day on Sunday morning, 2 days after the assassination by Jack Ruby. But Oswald had made the statement, "No, sir, I didn't shoot anybody," responding to the press. 3 or 4 times he denied it. His statements that he had not killed anybody have been applied to 2 tests that have been developed since that time. One's called a voice stress analyzer, the other's a psychological stress evaluator. And what they are is, in effect, lie detector tests for recorded statements. Everyone who has ever given Oswald statements to those tests has found that he was telling the truth. He didn't shoot anybody. Now, the witnesses to the Tippit killing, every single one of them originally said it was not Lee Harvey Oswald. They described somebody totally different.
Yeah. And an unreliable witness who fingered Oswald was the one who they chose to believe.
Well, that's correct. And even then, there were several witnesses that eventually said it was Oswald, but every one of those originally said it was not.
Right.
A man named Warren Reynolds, for instance, was a witness to the man escaping from the Tippit site, said it was not Lee Harvey Oswald. One night, Warren Reynolds was shot in the head. He survived miraculously, but apparently the bullet jarred his memory because then he did identify Oswald as the killer. A man named Domingo Benavides, who was one of the closest witnesses, if not the closest witness to the Tippit killing, said it was not Oswald.
Right.
Then his twin brother, Edward, was murdered in allegedly a bar fight. Then Benavides changed his mind as well. And it happened one after the other.
Right. This may seem like an off-the-wall question, but given the fact that your book covers a lot of political dirty tricks and gets into a lot of stuff that happened post-assassination, I've always wondered, and since I have the opportunity to ask you, I'd like to ask you if you thought that the incident at Chappaquiddick in 1969 was a dirty trick. Was that a setup?
It may very well have been. There are a lot of unanswered questions about Chappaquiddick, not the least of which is if Mary Jo Kopechne had died in the auto crash, how could dried blood be on her blouse? In other words, if she was underwater and drowned, there would have been no chance for the blood to have congealed and dried on the blouse, number one. Second of all, there was no water in her lungs. She did not drown. She may have died of asphyxiation, but considering the water was totally submerged and the car was so totally submerged, she would have allegedly been breathing up until that time. There certainly would have been massive amounts of water within her lungs, and there were not.
Your book also has a rather cryptic reference saying that she was more than just a secretary. What does that mean?
She was roommates with the secretary for Senator Smathers of Florida.
That's right.
And Senator Smathers was the one who was going to replace Lyndon Johnson as the vice presidential candidate in 1964. The public had not been informed about that as yet, but it's well known that the Johnsons and the Kennedys did not get along. They couldn't stand each other. President Kennedy, ironically, did not want Johnson to be his vice president in the first place. But Johnson had made the statement that he would never accept the number 2 position, that he would only be the president. And given that knowledge, President Kennedy, as a matter of courtesy and protocol, offered the vice president's position to him in the first place, and then Johnson did an immediate about-face and accepted it.
Yeah, he didn't think he would take it, in other words, and so he offered it, and here he was surprised to hear that Johnson would take it.
Exactly, so he was stuck with him.
I'm sorry to say I'm down to less than a minute, but and I know I don't want to ask any direct questions about the film because the film's not out yet, and you're not at liberty to say, but in a word or two, what's the public going to think when they see JFK by Oliver Stone?
I think that the movie will create a great deal of public awareness. People will learn about elements of the investigation they have never had a chance to deal with before. It will bring it to life for them, and hopefully it will create enough public outcry that some politician somewhere will be forced to examine this and that the case will be reopened. I hope that will be the result. In any case, the public's awareness will certainly be increased because of this wonderful film.
Mr. Groden, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Chuck. It's great talking to you.
It was a pleasure, my pleasure. High Treason is the name of the book. Robert Groden's been our guest. 3:55 News Talk Radio 610 WIOD. Time for
Well, it was interesting anyway. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana.
Yeah.
And we're getting like a different side of the story that says that mostly it's on a Cuban connection and the missile crisis and maybe the Bay of Pigs.
Right.
But camping, the bar, they're saying there that it was plotted at a bar called Sloppy Joe's.
Okay.
And that there were many Cubans in the area at the time.
Yeah, New Orleans had a Cuban community and a Cuban exile community about almost the size of Miami. It was a real hotbed of anti-Castro activity at that time.
Yes, sir. And I don't know if you're aware of the execution of Ochoa.
Yeah.
Well, we had that information in '88.
Okay.
That through the grapevine. The grapevine, right?
Yeah.
And it certainly did happen. But you know what my question was going to be?
What?
That if somehow Lee Oswald had survived, do you think they still would have tried to put the blame on him?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, there was a rather lengthy cable TV special a couple of years ago that ran on one of the cable channels. It was like an 8-hour special. I'm not kidding, like 5 or 8 hours, and it was over 2 or 3 nights. And it was the trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. What would have happened? And, they might have tried him, but I think that it was pretty much set in cement that they were going to bump him off before that happened. I'll tell you what, my own guess is that if he had a half-decent defense attorney, he would have beat the rap.
Yeah.
I think he would have beat the rap, if only because of the way that the cops mishandled the case. But in other words, he may have gotten off on technicalities, would never have gotten as far as, motive and opportunity. He just would have got off because the cops botched the case against him. All right?
Chuck, just one thing. I have a friend of mine that comes, they can come from Cuba now.
Yeah.
And I wish you could see it, the videotape of that trial of Ochoa.
Well, maybe get me a copy sometime. I'd like to see it.
Would you really?
I gotta let you go, but sure, if you get me a dub, I'll be glad to look at it.
What do I?
Just mail it to the station and care of me. It's Meyer.
Okay.
All right.
I'll do that.
Thanks for the call, Jimmy. Open lines in Broward, 2 of them, 524 WIOD, 524 WIOD. Palm Beach has not rung today that I know of. 655 WIOD. How about line 4? This would be Kevin.
Yeah, I called you yesterday, and you finally got through to Robert Groden.
We did.
No, you did.
Yeah.
Okay.
I keep saying we, but I use the royal we because the Queen is visiting this week.
Yeah, okay. Do you think there's any coincidence in William Webster resigning in the CIA right now with a lot of this stuff being stirred up, kind of considering Kennedy's assassination?
Oh, no.
Now, the reason why I say that is this. William Webster obviously brought a lot of openness from things I've just been reading in the paper to the CIA. Now, this guy Gates has supposedly Iran-Contra, affiliation, and he's really been in the deep cover type stuff for a long time. So is he going to close up the CIA? Would a former CIA director that's our president allow a reopening of this assassination?
Oh, I don't think that there's anybody in the federal government interested in investigating the assassination again right now. I don't think it'll happen, but no, I don't think there's any connection with Webster or William Sessions or any of that stuff.
Well, that's what I meant, Sessions, yeah.
Did you see Frontline last night by chance? Because James Jesus Angleton was a very powerful figure in the CIA for over 20 years. And
he went back to the OSS.
Yeah. I guess the hook here is. Listen, George Bush is a former CIA director. I've never been really comfortable with having a president who's a former CIA director, if only because the director, the DCIA, as they call them, the director of the Central Intelligence,
right?
They know all the secrets, and I really think that if you go on to become president, you're almost subject to a kind of international blackmail. You know all the secrets. George Bush knows things that he would never be allowed to tell, or wouldn't be willing to tell.
Right.
But I don't think that necessarily goes back to the assassination. But I'll leave you with this thought. If you read some of the books, go back to the Watergate connections, and in his most paranoid closing days before he left office, Richard Nixon was very concerned about what he kept calling the Bay of Pigs thing, which H.R. Haldeman has always said meant Kennedy assassination. So there's a little tidbit for history. I'll let you go, but thanks for the call, Kevin. One open line in Broward, 524-WIOD, and we don't have to talk just about this, but why not? Kendall.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Joe.
I just want to say I heard bits and pieces of the interview with that guy about the Kennedy, and I was only 6 years old, but I remember what happened. I remember seeing on television. I remember seeing how sad my parents were and the rest of the country. But I want to say, after 27 and a half years, I don't care who killed him. I don't care why. Let's just get it out in the open and say we screwed up. The government, the United States of America, has been covering it up.
Well, exactly, and so why not? And has the time passed? And it certainly has. And although there are a lot of people convinced that there was no conspiracy, the fact is that sometimes throughout history it takes time before facts can be released. And the reason why it hasn't been out yet, I think, is for precisely that reason. It's been covered up, and people will get in trouble for covering it up. Now the cover-up becomes almost more important than the event itself.
Right.
I got to take a break. I'll let you go. And an open line in Dade, 751-9463. 4:14 in the afternoon. Chuck Meyer for Rick and Suds. Time for another Skywatch 610 traffic update. Here he is, Tom Roberts.
All right, thank you. Afternoon, Chuck Meyer.
I'm happy to be back. Manny in Miami, you're on WIOD.
How you doing?
Fine.
I feel that the present administration is going to still try to cover it up, because if it all comes out now and they all tell the truth, it's going to be the demise of this present administration.
Yeah, and there's some other things that could be. You know, I saw Haynes Johnson, who's a well-known political reporter for the Washington Post, was on one of the TV shows the other night, and I don't know if you're following this thing about the 1980 election and the hostages, but he said that if it turns out to be true that the Reagan for presidency campaign made a deal with Iran to hold the hostages, thus denying Jimmy Carter re-election, it would be the biggest scandal in American history. And I got a feeling that in our lifetime we're going to see more scandals coming out of the last 10 years, and maybe with the Kennedy assassination the last 25 years, than we can imagine. Nothing ever surprises me anymore.
Everybody's just power hungry, and greed just is galore.
Yeah. Pretty scary.
Yeah.
Thanks for the call.
Bye-bye.
All right. Cooper City with Steve.
Hey, Chuck, how you doing today?
Good.
This is going to sound awful shallow, because I know nobody likes to hear compliments on that station because they make fun of them.
Yeah.
But you are a hell of a replacement.
Oh, well, good. I'm glad you're at least enjoying the show this week.
The segment was fascinating. You know, everybody remembers where they were, and unfortunately or fortunately, whatever the case may be, I'm from Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole subject is completely fascinating. I don't know if they'll ever get to the bottom of it, but it's about time somebody might have tried.
It's still a big story in Dallas. It's interesting because whenever there's a new development, or whenever somebody who was a principal back then comes back into the news, it's still covered more in Dallas than it is nationwide.
It is indeed. And you know what? In all fairness, the city got a tremendous black eye.
Oh, terrible.
Yeah, worldwide.
Well, Dallas is a whole generation removed from that now. It's not the city it used to be.
Oh, indeed not. I totally agree that at that point in time, it wasn't even in its infantile stages of growth.
Yeah, actually, it was a real redneck town, to just come right out and say it. But it's a much more, international cosmopolitan.
Oh yeah, it is a great, neat city from a standpoint that there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad. Mm. But overall, you got just about anything you'd ever want in Dallas: sophistication, wealth, poverty, everything that complements each other.
Yeah.
But and I must say, I listen to you guys all the time. There's one segment during the day that I can't stand.
Well, okay, why bring that up?
Well, why to bring that up? But
okay, What is it?
The neat thing about it is you didn't try to, you have your own identity. And I know there's a large population out here that misses you on Saturday morning, and I know you had other commitments. I heard you explain that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I appreciate the fact that you were listening Saturday, and I hope you keep doing it.
Oh, and I shall indeed.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for the call, Steve. I appreciate that. Well, we got open lines. And during I guess it was about 2 o'clock or 2:30, we were talking about the Queen making $8 million a year. One guy called in to say, yeah, but she doesn't make $8 million a year. She has to divide it among the royal family of the 11 people. 11 into $8 million comes out to a cool $727,272.72 each. So we've cleared that mathematical problem up. Now, today's Miami Review, which is kind of the lawyer newspaper in town, published by the American Lawyer, I've been invited to a reception on Queen Elizabeth's yacht. Where can I get information about British etiquette? I will not be meeting the Queen, but will be socializing with other British guests. What to do? Answer: relax, you'll be fine. Remember, we won the war, and they're visiting us. However, if you're still feeling insecure, some reassurance. The Public Affairs Office for the British Embassy in Washington says unless you're meeting the Queen, basic good manners should see you through this event. I guess if you're meeting the Queen, you're allowed to use bad manners. The best thing is for people to be themselves. That's the advice of the British. Here are the do's and don'ts. Avoid the word English. Use British instead. Most honorary titles are used even among familiar acquaintances, but it's wise to first hear how others address that person. It's becoming increasingly common for business associates to use first names even on a first acquaintance. Okay. Avoid striped ties in case they are copies of British regimentals. So don't wear a striped tie to meet the Queen. British dress and conversation is conservative.